Tō katoa, no mai, haere mai, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Supporting Sporty Girls. My name is Kelly Kerr, and I'm Sport Development Consultant at Sport New Zealand. I'm going to be your host for this evening. I'd like to open this up with our Sport New Zealand karakia, and this karakia is about bringing us together and settling us into tonight's kaupapa. So, tu taua mai I runga, tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, kia tau ai te mauri ora, tū whakamaua kia tina, haumi e, hui e, tāki e. So kia ora te whānau. Want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Welcome to our New Zealand audiences and anyone from joining us from overseas. I've seen a couple pop in. I'm really excited for tonight's kōrero, and I'm sure that you're going to get a lot from our always very special guest, Kylie Cox. This webinar supports Balance is Better, which is Sport New Zealand's philosophy for youth sport. And hopefully many of you will have heard about Balance is Better, but for those that haven't, Balance is Better is our national framework for youth sport. It's about ensuring all young people receive a quality sport experience, regardless of abilities, needs, or motivations. And it's about keeping young people in sport, a focus on process rather than outcome, a focus on fun, and supporting young people to reach their potential, whatever that might be. And we all play a role here, whether we're administrators or coaches or parents in whānau. So before we get into the conversation, a couple of housekeeping things. If you have any questions, please drop these into the chat. And if you haven't found it, it's on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the night, and we'll do our very best to answer as many questions as possible through the conversation. Just a few guidelines for the chat. Please keep questions to tonight's topic so we can make the most of our time, and please keep comments positive and constructive. I always feel like a bit of an air hostess where I'm giving the safety briefing. To test out that chat function, if you haven't already, please drop your name, where you are from, and the sport that you're involved with into that chat, and we can get a sense of who we've got. If you have any technical issues with the video, please close the window, come back out on the same link again. And if issues still persist, we've got people in the background that will be supporting. So flick them an email on the address that you received the link on. It is my pleasure to introduce again, this is the second webinar that I've been fortunate enough to host with our lovely Kylie Cox. So Kylie is a physiotherapist with a postgrad qualification in sport medicine and sport science. Kylie's special interest is in female health, and in particular adolescent and young women's sport and active recreation. Kylie works as a performance physio in Christchurch and is a team physiotherapist with Mainland's National Netball League and the New Zealand Secondary Schools netball teams. As director of the Healthy Athlete Project, Kylie provides education on female athletic health to schools, clubs and sporting organisations, both nationally and regionally. Her goal is to work with athletes, coaches, whānau and support staff to improve awareness of female health-related issues and promoting best practice support of female athletes. Kylie, welcome.
Seems to be getting longer every time.
I'm trying. So look, welcome. So looking forward to having this chat and this kōrero with you tonight. And look, things that we're gonna do have a really quick overview of the Balanced Female Health resource, which I know you're hugely passionate about and had a really critical involvement in the development of. We're going to also dive into how coaches can utilize the resource with their athletes and participants, and practical tips. So that's really key for tonight, right? Is actually what are some practical things that people can take away and put into their coaching that really support health and holder conversations. We're also going to talk a little bit around some considerations for schools and clubs. And at the end of all of that, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. So again, please do chuck these into the chat as we go through. And look, hey, this is an enormous topic and we could spend hours talking about it. But we will do our very, very best to do justice to this topic. And we'll also be dropping links and articles for other information that goes a little bit deeper and that provides additional support. So, there's obviously the Balanced Female Health resource itself, and we're going to chuck a whole load of other things in too. Equally, the slides will be available at the end too. So, Balanced Female Health. So this is the resource that has been put together by Kylie, by Sharon Kearney from Netball New Zealand as well, and a whole lot of other expertise that fed into the development of this resource. And it covers off things like puberty and development, the menstrual cycle, maintaining energy in sport, and really dives into that understanding and supporting what balanced health looks like. signs to look out for, and includes lots and lots of tips. And importantly, what we're going to focus on the conversation tonight is how we can utilize this with our communities and for coaches. We've got some key tips and some takeaways and these considerations throughout the resource as well. Kylie, anything you want to just really quickly add into kind of the resource itself?
I think the main thing to understand about this resource is that we are, we're trying to shift some of the conversation around the emphasis on menstruation alone. And in this particular resource, which complements some of the other resources from Sport New Zealand, we're really looking at overall female health, female athletic health, and we're going to talk about the pillars of health, of which the menstrual cycle is only one of those pillars that we need to consider when we're considering whether an athlete is actually, working in a balanced sort of healthy environment or within their bodies. So we're really passionate that this information is widely available to the community, and that's why it's it's a free resource. It's to be shared as widely as you want it to be. It's not limited. It doesn't cost anything, and our main aim is to really get the basic messages out. We're not expecting people to be experts. We're just trying to increase knowledge and awareness.
Amazing. And I think that's a really important point, right? Is actually we're not trying to make experts out of people. This one resource doesn't have every answer, but the point is how we can raise awareness and raise understanding for them, because the important role that coaches and parents and communities play in supporting balanced health. And so you talked about the pillars, and this is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, so it's really important to understand in and around female athlete health that we have a number of considerations which make up a healthy athlete. So the resource goes through all of these in more detail, and the purpose of tonight is just to give a bit of an overview to encourage people, or hopefully to stimulate a little bit of interest so that you do a bit of a deep dive. But essentially, the pillars of health are the interaction between these sort of 7 items that are on this infographic, and this is also available on the website. So again, we're not just talking about menstruation, but we're talking about energy availability, sleep, this balanced lifestyle between exercise and recovery so that we can adapt and perform. Also looking at injury and recurrent illness, and making sure that we're providing these spaces that are both safe and fun so that we're continuing to build that engagement in sport and that lifetime love of sport. So it's just looking at sort of this holistic kind of approach. And of course, menstruation is part of that, because our female athletes have a unique physiology which sets them apart. But our conversations in and around health and in and around female athlete health should never really be in isolation, I guess. So when looking at how your athletes are tracking, your students, we want a little bit of awareness and consideration of kind of everything that goes into the pot, really.
Yeah, and so I think for me that talks to, there's a physical side of things, right? But there's also so much of a social and emotional piece in here. And that last point there around creating safe spaces for young people to talk about their health is a really important part, right?
Yeah, and I think, what we really want to do in the future is beat these dropout rates that we've got, right? That we've got, especially in New Zealand, around our adolescent females feeling, shame or stigma around the menstrual cycle. We've obviously got some great resources coming out in and around reducing that, improving conversations, opening up conversations so that female athlete health issues should be treated the same as we talk about injury, or we talk about illness, or we talk about health, and that we're including that kind of mental health and social engagement. So yeah, we just really want to build healthier athletes, and we want to build it from the community level so that when they go through this pathway and hopefully, go through the pathway and as adults, that they're more connected and aware with their bodies, and that coaches have that knowledge and that empowerment to base their conversations on, because we know one of the reasons that people don't have conversations is because they lack confidence in the topic, and that's the really big thing about getting this resource out there.
Amazing. So that leads us, I guess, really nicely into some of this stuff, right? So there is so much information. I think I printed it off the other day, and it's, you know, kind of 30-40 pages of trees. But actually, how can coaches best use this resource to support female athlete health and well-being? So what are some of the, I guess, the key tips that you're really hoping for from this resource and for coaches to really consider?
Yeah, well, I guess, I'm a little bit of an academic as well. And so we do know, from the research that the knowledge and awareness of female athlete health related issues and what makes up female athlete health is quite low throughout not just our country, but internationally. And as little as sort of, 15% of coaches can sometimes name some of those components that make up a healthy athlete. So the first thing is really that we want to enhance awareness and knowledge around female health related issues. So if we can have a relatively basic evidence-based factual document that we can get out into the community, that can be shared with coaches, clubs, parents. Obviously, we've done a talk for them before, and later down the track to the athletes themselves, then we're going to build that awareness that we need to, I guess, stop being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, to be able to be a bit more proactive, to be a little bit more early in our intervention, and to essentially keep the health of our athletes and the longevity in sport. So we want to sort of see, first and foremost, that coaches are becoming empowered, so that this resource is either made available to them, and we'll talk about that later, or that they can access it readily, easily, without financial constraints or barriers, and then that they look to kind of build some of this information into their whole team culture. And so by whole team culture, I kind of mean, especially in community and adolescent sport, that we're including both the athlete and the parents, and that, I guess, coaches are able to kind of front foot, with the empowerment of knowledge, they're able to front foot the conversations, or at least make that team culture aware that female health related issues is part of the discussion, as it would be for injury, as it would be for illness, as it would be for struggling with academic pressures, that all of those things are on the table because we're focused on health.
Yeah, amazing.
So that's the two main things.
And I think when we were preparing for this, and we spoke about this yesterday, is setting up your team values and to really include this as part of the conversation. So what does it mean to be part of our team? Well, we want to look after you as individuals, and we want to make sure that you're healthy. And these are the, so being able to weave this conversation and almost normalize some of the conversation. Would that be right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the questions that come through to me is, how can we have conversations about sensitive issues or around female health related issues with young people and with their parents? And I think we can get possibly a little bit hung up on the intricacies of that. And I think what I'd like to see is that we have discussions that aren't in isolation, so that we're not getting coaches isolated into conversations purely about the menstrual cycle, that it's part of those pillars of health, that it's part of conversations around energy, around nutrition, around other stresses in life. So, if we can broaden the knowledge and that we can make it part of a big conversation, then I think we will do quite a bit to get those conversations going.
And it's also things like, we talk about there's the physical side of things, but the social side of things as well, right? So what happened at school today that has got them stressed, or they've had a fight with some friends, and actually that has an impact. Young women's mental health has a real impact on the way that they will perform. They may just, not be that, have a lot of energy, or all of those kind of things, right?
Yeah, and I think if we're basing it around these pillars of health, then we're making it comfortable that, or at least being empathetic and realistic that those things do affect young people, and that we can't expect to be putting our head in the sand, or we can't be expected to ignore those realities of young people and the perception. So we need to consider that their perception is actually their reality. That may not mean that they don't take part. It may mean that they have a different role on that particular day, but it means that you're factoring all those things in. So these conversations are not just, again, they're not just about periods, and they're not just about menstruation. They're about social health. They're about nutrition. They're about added pressures. They're about your home life. They're just bringing all of those things to the table of what makes a well-rounded young female athlete.
Yeah. And so one of the other things that you talked about as well is how to create safe spaces for those conversations to happen. And I think, in previous webinars and in previous conversations that I've had, one of the questions that's come out is, well, how do we create safe space? If I'm a male coach, how do I have a conversation about health? Would there be anything that you think coaches could consider to, again, and it's probably just that keeping it broad to health conversations as opposed to single parts of one of those pillars, right, around menstruation or those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit of a tricky one, and maybe it's a little bit of a time and place, and it's picking your moment, and also conversations as needed. Not all conversations need to be had just because you can have them. So I guess the first thing is, when I say about front footing those discussions, if you feel comfortable at the start of a season, I would, I'd bring everyone in, the parents and the young people. We'd talk about all those, you might actually talk about all those pillars of health and say, you are open to come to me about any of these issues, and they will be acknowledged. I mean, I think safe spaces and safe conversations come from people first empathizing, acknowledging perception and their reality, and then not necessarily, we're not here to treat young females or females as fragile, but their safe spaces still mean that we need to acknowledge and respect, and then, move forward with a plan. If those conversations need to be had at a deeper level, then it may be that that's facilitated through parents and emails. If you're not comfortable doing those conversations in person, I suggest maybe at the start of the season, again, just putting out, when you put out your team newsletter, just put out around those pillars of health that they're open to be discussed. If your child needs to adapt a plan based on any of those things, that it's open for discussion and it will be valued and recognised. So,
I think because, and utilising the resource in that way, right, as far as, look, here are the, or even that infographic that we had on the slide before, and actually having that as the conversation starter might be useful both for the athletes and the parents, if they're new to some of this stuff, and you as a coach as well, right?
Yeah, and again, maybe that's another way to disseminate the information, to get parents on board to say, we will be practicing team values and policies around balanced female health, and these are the sorts of things we'll be taking into consideration. Here's the resource if you haven't seen it, so that if any of these discussions come up, or I feel like I'd like to chat to you with them about, this is why they're, this is what they're about, and this is why they're here. But I think it's really important, again, to reiterate, we are not wanting coaches to be we're not expecting them to be experts. We're not wanting them to go in and hound people on their personal information and collect data. We just want a knowledge and awareness that if you think someone's struggling, or if you think someone has some health-related issues that need attention, that you feel a little bit upskilled in having the first line of conversation, so that we can get them the help that they possibly need.
Brilliant. And so one of the things, if we go, how do we, connecting some, I guess, we've talked around holistically, how does this stuff look? What are some of these maybe top tips under those different headings that that you'd like to get across on to coaches tonight?
Yeah, well, I that the most important thing in and around the puberty and development space, when you dive into the resource, will give you a little bit more information, is to understand the differences between females and males and the time frames in which they happen. So they obviously, or not obviously, I hate it when people say that, they occur earlier in females than males. Our young girls get taller before their bones get stronger, so the loading aspect of what their skeletal system can do is really important in that phase. And of course, they go through some huge body changes as well as social and emotional changes, and we do need to kind of factor those in. And what we do need to be is we need to be prepared that those changes may actually impact performance, and they probably will in the bulk of young females. So as a coach, it's being aware, especially if you're a coach that maybe follows a group of girls through a pathway, or you start off in one age group and then move into another. Sometimes that's not always going to flow on as well as you think, because there may be changes. And in a team sport, there's going to be a variety of pubertal stages
I was
to recognise.
I was just going to say that, like potentially within a team of, year 9 and 10 girls, you could have really varied stages of puberty, right? There's some that may not have really hit that kind of 12 years old into year 9, some that are maybe earlier developers as well.
Absolutely. And I think as tough as that is, it's just recognising that some young females may be able to do more than others. And that is actually reality. So younger, more skeletally immature, or on the start of the puberty sort of spectrum, they are possibly going to tolerate less, not always. The early developers may be able to tolerate more in terms of load, but may not be able to tolerate more in terms of emotional capacity just because they're bigger. So it's just kind of understanding those changes, I guess, and familiarizing yourself with them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really
and if you want to, do you want me to go on?
Because I think there's an element of coaches understanding different loads and what load looks like. So I know that our wonderful crew that are in the background of the webinar tonight are dropping some links in, and one of those links I think has been around strength training for young women and the benefits. But it also, I think one of the other links that we've got coming up a bit later on does talk about, well, what does load look like and what does that mean? So menstrual cycle, that's the one. It's on our screen. What are some of the messages?
It is absolutely vitally important. Like, don't get me wrong. It's an absolute indicator of underlying health and well-being. So it is a really good benchmark and barometer, especially in young females, about how they're kind of tracking. So the onset of menses, or the onset of menstruation, getting your first period, is a sign that pubertal development is going in a sequential order, but also it gives some really good insights into how an individual's body is coping with the load it's going through, or the training or the exercise, how well it's supported by energy and fuel in, because all of those factors that we talked about in those pillars of health are interactive, and the goal is that those factors work on strengthening the hormone networks, and those networks then send out the signals to get progression and adaptation and recovery and progress, and that's where the performance comes in. So it's just giving a really good understanding that it's a good marker, but it's not the only marker, and that's why I come back to those pillars of health, that we need to be thinking about everything. And also just to be clear, the resource goes into how to kind of recognize that someone may be having some menstrual cycle dysfunction, and things to look out for in young people that should cause alarm bells, or maybe raise some red flags, if you like.
And I think importantly there as well, right, is to be able to go to, for coaches maybe to refer, or to have the conversations if they need to facilitate conversation either with the athlete or the parents, but then to be able to refer them on to specialists. So coaches are not asking you to be specialists and give advice on some of this stuff too, right?
Yeah, like we definitely we want to open conversations. We definitely want to open conversations, and show that we have an understanding, get people the help they want. But that's really where I expect that the coach's job not so much finishes. You know, they're obviously going to monitor their athlete and they're going to be involved in some of that process, but they are there to kind of facilitate that next step, maybe to get the parents involved. And I think when we talk about the organisations, sometimes depending on where you sit in your organisation or the level of coaching, you could strengthen some of those relationships with those providers, because there's often providers in your area who are attached to your sport that we can access a little bit more.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So energy and fueling and things like that, that first point is really important, right, is around actually athletes arriving, having had enough to eat during the day, ready for their activity, and with additional snacks too, right?
Yeah, so I think one of the big issues, like nutrition is hugely important in the health of everybody, females in particular, because they're more at risk of developing energy deficits, but also in young people because the cost of growing and developing is huge. So first of all, we're trying to get this awareness that timing matters, like timing of nutrition in and around exercise to support the energy demands really matters. So before and after. There are some historical sports where the length of the session is really long. So some of those sports we're looking to see organisationally how we can support and build in time for fueling and refueling. And so as a coach, it may be that you can facilitate that for us in terms of just getting a little bit more energy into young people. But also I know, parents are often complaining that kids are eating them out of house and home, but I think that that's kind of, it's almost like a little bit of a pat on the back, if you ask me. Like if your child is eating in and around exercise and they are sleeping well and they're waking up happy, ready to go again, then you're probably winning a little bit of the battle. So that's really great.
I've got a 10-year-old boy, and I think he's got hollow legs. I know that he's got hollow legs. He has not stopped eating, and so I'm getting nervous about if he's eating that much now. Imagine what's going to happen when he gets properly into puberty and those kind of things.
I mean, some kids are just really great eaters from the start, and some develop it as they go through puberty, and some really struggle. And so there is a bit of if we can all be helping out on that pathway as parents, as coaches, as clubs, organisations, if we can all be doing our little part to encourage, support, supply, and have positive messaging in and around that, that would be great. And I realise that we can't win them all, but what we can do is some small steps to address the problem.
And I think also it's about being able to have, and again, we've talked about having health conversations normalised in our trainings, but building in healthy conversations about food, about fueling, and as coaches, how we can practically build in some time during our training sessions, so where they actually are encouraged to go and get a drink or have a snack. And I think you mentioned it before, right? Particularly for those sports that there are longer training times and or tournaments, coaches taking teams away to tournament.
Yeah, so that's really important, and a really high risk time for young people is either when there is a lack of time or resources to eat during training. I know some sports are training up to 3 to 4 hours at a time, and if your snack is an hour before you even get there and your next snack afterwards is another hour till it's family dinner time, or that's a good, we're talking about anywhere from 4 to 6 hours without food, then we want to try and build that in. Now that's not to say that everyone's going to need it. They may come more prepared than others, but it's giving people an opportunity so that we reduce the chances of this unintentional underfueling, where we just either don't have the resources, the time, or we haven't sort of planned for it. So if we can organisationally or personally be taking some of that responsibility, or at least building it into our culture, that would be great.
And so that leads on to a bit we're going to talk about in a moment, right, around what organisations can do with the resource and sort of the structures that we may be able to put in place and influence too. One of the questions that's come through is around body changes in girls as they go through puberty, and how that affects their movement patterns and how that affects their confidence. Both, and I think that, we think about sports like gymnastics where you've got high levels of, I guess, complex moves and things like that. Other sports where there's really dynamic movement. So, if I think about rugby or I think about, games like netball, coach, the important message here is coaches having, an understanding of what some of those changes are, what they might expect to see in their athletes as they're going through changes, and then the adaptations that they might need to make into the trainings, because confidence is what we're wanting to build in these young women, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a really hard time. It's challenging, and it's actually challenging for all parties. It's challenging for the athlete, it's challenging for the coach, and it's highly challenging for parents who have been watching a progressive development that then sometimes goes a little bit awry. But I guess what I would say in young females is often it's in and around those changes to the center of gravity. It's changes to their ability to react quickly. Coordination often goes a little bit awry as they get taller and a bit more, the word, I guess, gangly, or a little bit more of an arm span, leg, So it's that control of their bodies, and it is a real time where they're learning some new ways to move and adapt.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's really important that we try and focus on their strengths and not their weaknesses. So there are still going to be some things that they're really good at, and they might develop. It might be a time for them to develop different skills within that new body. It's also a time where, as coaches, it's a real opportunity, I guess, to strengthen your repertoire about how you train someone in a different way, and that you can't just maybe do the same tricks. The thing also is that as girls grow and they strengthen through puberty, so yes, they go through a really difficult time, but when they come out the other side of that, they are often stronger and more robust and able to do things that they couldn't do before. But it's about getting them through that transitional period, because even in some of our artistic or aesthetic sports, as they get stronger, they actually become more capable and competent and able to withstand things. But again, we sort of get to that point where they do lose confidence for whatever reason, and they tend to drop out, and we either lose them to another sport, or we lose them to sport altogether. So it's a really hard time.
It is a really hard time. And there's physical changes that are going on. There's also a heck of a lot going on from a brain development perspective, in that I remember doing a webinar in a session with Catherine Burkett, and she talked about the brain basically reboots. It shuts down, it reboots. There's a whole load of stuff that's going on. So from a mental health perspective, and that drives to some of that coordination stuff too, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really, I guess, there's a lot of confidence, body image issues, self-talk, negative self-talk. And I think it's a really important time for coaches to try and create those spaces that they want to see, maybe even for their own daughters. So it is a hard one. It probably requires as much upskilling and professional development in terms of coaching skills as this does in terms of female athlete health, on how you manage through that time. But just being aware of creating in my opinion, a strength-based model where you're really focusing on what they can do and what they can't, not what they can't do all the time, because that's only going to impact that mental health further. So yes, tread carefully, but know that it's a transitional period, and they will come out the other side if they are guided, if they're guided well.
Amazing. So, and I know we've touched on maybe some of this stuff as well, but we've also talking around, well, how can organisations, so this might be clubs, this might be schools, this might be regional or national sports organisations, how can they best utilise this resource to support female participants?
Yeah, well, again, I think, the research is kind of showing that we don't have enough female health education within our organisations, and it's not clearly outlined a lot of the time in coaching pathways and coaching accreditation modules. And so again, what we want organisations to do is have a think about making female health and wellbeing a priority. And by choosing that priority, I guess, you're taking something like this resource and you're providing it for coach development, and including it also, I guess, in parent and athlete, the whole experience, and making sure that you're driving a female health initiative within your organisation. So we want organisations to share it with their management structures. We want them to share it with their coaches, and then for coaches to share it with their parents, and for parents to share it with their kids. So we don't have any limits to how that's shared. I guess what we do or would like to see from organisations is that don't just do that step.
Yeah,
that they don't just say, here's a resource. We've covered that, as a lot of things happen. We kind of then say, put it out to your communities, put it out to your coaches, and then engage some conversation and some feedback. See where the learnings are, see where the gaps are in terms of ongoing knowledge. Do they still need a little bit more professional development? Do you need someone to come out and kind of touch on some finer points? Do you need some more individualization around your sport? Remembering that this is a generic resource for hundreds of thousands, of New Zealanders. So yeah, we kind of want not just a one-stop, give it out, walk away. We just want to facilitate more conversation, more feedback, and then if we need to take it to those next steps, we can do that. And again, it's just really trying to focus some of these discussions around athlete health and well-being, so that we avoid some of the pitfalls that have happened in the past, especially around our female athletes.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's a really important point too, is going, just sharing that's only sort of step one. It's actually sharing it and then creating the space for the conversations to happen, because we know that, we talked about it, you talked about it really well before, that the intention is to support and grow confidence of our coaches to be able to engage in these conversations. That's not just going to come through the sharing of a resource. That's going to come through discussions and further education and coaches feeling supported to be able to have some of these health conversations too, eh?
Yeah, that's really important. I think just making sure again that, like organisations aren't just giving it to their coaches and then saying, hey, that's kind of your responsibility now. It's about ensuring that the coach can have a roundtable discussion, and that those deeper discussions are happening within the organisation. They're not necessarily happening between the coach and the parent, or the coach and the athlete, that the coach is well supported, that when issues come up either for the coach or for the athlete, that the organisation has a clear pathway around the participant's voice. So whether that be the coach or whether that be the athletes, and having some clear guidelines in place there in and around what's appropriate and what they expect.
And I think that, so the last point there, that number 3, is around engaging consistent messaging around health and well-being before winning. So that ties in really, we think about balance is better, and I guess the intention of this resource is, let's move away from those just about winning conversations and the pressure that comes with that, to how are we making sure that our athletes and our girls and our participants are enjoying, and have a balanced physical health and balanced mental health too. And that comes before winning.
Yeah, and I'm expecting, like I expect in the world that if an athlete is struggling, excuse me, or if their health and well-being is at risk, that we have some coaches who step up and have courageous conversations about keeping those players out for a week or give them time off that particular training session, reduce their load during a tournament. That really health is the priority. And so again, as well, parents, I want them to have those courageous conversations when they recognize those signs in their own daughters or their own young people that they're looking after, is that they have discussions around health and around well-being, and not just about playing and game time.
And I remember we talked about that in the last webinar, right, around the important relationship that coaches and parents build together, because the well-being of the girls is what's at the centre of this stuff. And so where coaches and parents can have those good quality conversations that can speak to the well-being of their girls, that supports that too. So another couple of tips that you've got down here around organisations thinking about accessible period products. And I know Lisa has put a comment in the chat there around their cricket club. I've heard lots of stories about the changes of uniforms and period products being readily available in club rooms, but also in kit bags, and girls knowing that they're there.
Yes, yeah. And, that's how an organisation can support in a, I guess like in a small financial way, so that's not at the cost of the coach or the parents or people taking turns to stock it up. It might be, I know period products are expensive, but it may be something that's works out on average of $3 to $5 a week, or something that just has a sort of steady top up. So things like that, making sure that it's there, that there's no questions asked, that they have clean and suitable facilities, that they're well maintained, that there's areas for washing up, there's areas for sanitary items to be disposed of, and this movement in and around what young females can comfortably wear to training. So it may be that they do start to have some options in and around what they wear, or that those options are at least well-fitting and of a colour that's doesn't cause extra anxiety. So it's just sort of trying to make sure that we're aware and breaking down barriers wherever we can. And I know Sport New Zealand's also doing a lot of work in and around that, in terms of period products, uniform, clothing, kit, reducing some of that stigma. So it's awesome as well.
And I think some of the other things organisations might want to consider is looking at season structures, looking at training loads, tournaments. Are there some little tweaks or changes that actually might better support young women to participate? And as again, we're talking about community sport here too. So yes, there are those that are in maybe more of those competitive teams, but also thinking about our social participants and how might adapting some of our offerings better suit or better engage our young women and girls into sport and keep them involved. Because I think, as you said before, their dropout rates are really high, and these are in this kind of around that 14, 15 years old. And some of that, we know is because the experience just isn't great. So from an organisation perspective, how can we structure sport, training loads, tournaments to make sure that it's accessible and that it's fun?
Oh God, that's a hard question. Organisational, not my.
That's a leave that one out in the ether. That's for our wonderful people on the call.
I think there'll be some really, there'll be people who are well more versed at this in terms of organisational structure. Thanks, but I think in terms of, like, if it's a social team, match them with an appropriate coach who's got the same goals and values. Like, there's no point having someone who's really technical and all about repetition and high intensity sort of dot your I's and cross your T's if you've got a social team. If you're talking about when you first started that, I was kind of thinking about one thing I talked about this week is trying to find players' sweet spots. So I know this is not necessarily an organizational, but in terms of working with coaches, making sure that coaches can identify when players are in this really good healthy zone and it's like a sweet spot where they can tolerate and making sure that coaches have that kind of knowledge around when too much is too much for one kid and when you can push them a little bit more, because kids will have different tolerance levels. So probably just making sure that the coach fits the team, that they are well supported in their professional development, that if they come with queries about meeting their athlete needs, that the organisation is looking into them as well as they can be.
And I think so. One of the questions that has come through on the chat as well is I'm just trying to find it here now. The educate, so that not just sharing the resource, and it links back to your earlier comments. Not just sharing the resource, but facilitating further conversations. So for sports, to really think, whether maybe they've got paid coaches or there's paid staff involved, how we educate those staff around this stuff so that they can then consider the breaks for snacks and refueling, and actually getting them to build that in. But really, it's because they understand why they need to build it in, eh?
Yeah, definitely. Just making sure, I guess, as much as coaching is a voluntary role in most cases, those of us who coach because we really want to do a good job and we really want to build a rapport, and we want to make sure that kids enjoy sport, and we want to make sure that they go on. So we always will have things that we can get better at, and organisations can support this through evenings and professional development and coaches' nights where they come in and have a kōrero around, whatever it is that might be related to female health, or it might be related to skill development through the pubertal phase. That just, if they can get conversations happening, they can bring in experts, they can talk amongst themselves and problem solve, that would be great for the sport, great for females.
So a question that has come through as well is we talked about, we don't want coaches to be experts. They don't need to have all the information. This resource, this fantastic resource, is about growing their confidence and their knowledge. Who do they refer to? So if you think, actually, I've got I can see some triggers, I can see some red flags from some of an athlete that I'm working with, who should they be referring them to? And maybe in the first instance, or, if they're not going to have, maybe they've had a conversation with the young person.
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of different ways. If it, first of all, presents with injury-related concern, then, of course, off to the physiotherapist, preferably, or the GP. But let's say if we're talking about physiotherapist, obviously my passion is upskilling them as well, so that they're all familiar with this sort of information and that they're not just treating the injury, but they're treating the person. So we've got the physiotherapist. If it's around recurrent illness or mental health or any of those particular signs or symptoms that we kind of think aren't quite right, or you're concerned about the health and well-being. In community sport, we will often say GP first, so back to the GP. If you have particular concerns that you want to put, I'm sure a GP will always be appreciative of something in writing. Otherwise, obviously, the parent hopefully will be an advocate for the child, and if you've had a conversation, they can go in armed with a little bit of information themselves. if it's something that you feel that you can fund, and there is some degree of having to self-fund health, then we can look at sports physicians, psychologists, counsellors at school is another really good option in terms of linking people in for mental health. So there are people there, I think, again, if the front line are armed with some knowledge and awareness, and they can either converse that or put that in writing, it does really help for those providers to see the big picture, not just treat what's in front of them, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's like we know as well that the GPs and counsellors and those mental health services are under huge amounts of pressure and things like that. But I think equally, can we arm up our coaches and our communities to be able to open some of those conversations, not necessarily have to solve all of those problems, but know then where they can refer them to, right?
Yeah, and look, it's hard, but it doesn't mean we should stop trying. I mean, we just got to keep, your local physiotherapist should have links with, strong links with sports physicians. They should have links with other health providers like nutritionists, dietitians. They will often have links with multidisciplinary teams that also can access mental health support. So it is worth finding a good person or looking into, getting referrals from other people within your community of who they've used and accessing it that way. But it has to be worth it.
What I've been kind of keeping a little bit an eye on the chat, and there's been some questions coming through. We've got a little bit of time left, team. So if you do have any other questions, please do chuck them into that chat. But what I've also loved seeing in here is the examples of equestrian or no more white jodhpurs for competitions unless you want to, and things like swimming, encouraging close fitting for swimming, but doesn't have to be togs. So there is so much happening in this space, right? And it must be really heartening for you to see all of these things come to life.
Yeah, like we're getting there, but we know, some research takes up to 17 years to get into practice. So it's probably been going for a long time to change some of the kit and clothing. That hasn't happened overnight, and I'm sure people have been battling that for a long time. But I think we're making really good changes. There's small incremental changes. Something is happening in this space all the time in a positive way. Unfortunately, there's still things happening in a negative way, but overall, I think we're moving in the right direction. So it is heartening. It's good, and the aim is that girls understand their bodies better, that they have better health and body literacy, that coaches understand females in a way they haven't done before, and that we get people staying in sport. That's the aim.
And there's obviously some considerations too for maybe cultural differences around Māori and Pacifica girls, and what menstruation and different cultural differences too, right? So I guess the key is keep understanding and keep educating yourself as a coach.
Yeah, and I think that might be something that, so again, in my practice as a physiotherapist, when I tour with teams, it's being aware that, our Pacific Island and Māori culture, being in and around water or submerged in water in and around their menstrual cycle or menstruation itself is sort of, is sacred to them and not something that they often practice widely. So it's being aware that some of those factors, so that if a young child is resistant to getting in the water, or an adolescent, that it's not seen as dissent or disobedience unless we actually look to find out what's underneath that. So it's not jumping to conclusions, it's trying not to be judgmental. It's about having that knowledge, again, armed with that knowledge, so that you can have a confident conversation about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the overarching theme here is understand the young women, the girls, the females that you're working, that you're coaching, that you're involved with from a coaching perspective, and for organizations to really be mindful and be considerate of, well, what is going to make a safe space for our women to enjoy and to love participating in sport. If there was one take-home message, Kylie, I know we've got lots of pearls of wisdom and we could absolutely keep going on this all the time. If there's one thing that you hope that everybody takes away from tonight, this is your moment.
Oh.
Mic drop moment. What is it?
Okay, so I think it's probably consider whether the individual athlete is in their sweet spot. So are they tolerating things? Are they bouncing back? Are they enthusiastic? Do they come back refreshed? Are they progressing? Are they happy? Do they appear healthy? You know, all of those signs. If we get the underlying factors right, you'll have a child who is in their sweet spot.
Amazing. I love that. And my other takeaways were this resource, Balanced Female Health, is around increasing our coaches' confidence and their knowledge around female health issues, and what getting to the sweet spot looks like. There's lots of things to consider. There's all different pillars. It's not just about menstruation, that it is about nutrition, and it is about safe spaces, and that it is about rest and recovery. So letting them sleep in a little bit is okay.
Yeah. So and again, you know, I know we're trying to cover everything. People are probably wanting way more information. There's lots in the resource. And if demand's there, I'm sure we'll be back, Kelly.
We'll be back. We'll be absolutely back. Look, Kylie, thank you so very much. Again, I always enjoy our conversations. I learn a lot, and I really hope that everyone on the call has been able to pick up some key tips to take away that mic drop moment that you left us with. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in on the call. If you want to find out more about Balance is Better, have a look around the Balance is Better website. Sign up to receive the e-newsletter. We've dropped some files into the chat function, and the copy of this presentation as well. I'm going to close us out with our karakia and send us all on our way. So, tu tawa mai I runga, tu tawa mai I raro, tu tawa mai I roto, tu tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, kia tau ai te mauri ora, tutu whakamaua kia tina, Haumi e, hui e, tā e ki e. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all so very, very much. Good night. Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks.